Well, good morning. Thank you for being out here with us this morning to come together and worship as a family and study the Word of God. Uh, as Jeremy said this morning, that we do have quite a few out traveling, many of them going to camp, so please remember them in your prayers as they are coming and going, and just have a successful week there at camp, that all those young people are able to grow and come together spiritually. So what if I told you that there's one decision that would change and impact the rest of your life? That one decision could really mold how you walk throughout life. And it's one that you tend to make fairly early in your life, in your walk with God. If you go ahead and open up to Daniel chapter 1, we spend most of our time there is in Daniel chapter 1. And while you turn over there, I want to go ahead and kind of explain some of this history that's going on, because when we begin in verse 1, it's kind of a jumping in point that if you don't have the background, it doesn't quite make sense. So we're going to actually pick up multiple kings back from here. It's the beginning of verse 1 is in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Well, there's a lot that happens before this. And that the beginning of the end for the nation of Judah starts with Hezekiah. Hezekiah, in his moment, a moment of weakness and flattery, has brought in or accepted these Babylonian emissaries. And they've come in because of just rumors and trying to figure out of what's up with this nation of Judah. And Hezekiah comes out and shows them all the wealth and treasure of his house, of the nation, of the temple, and then is kind of got a little bit of a big head about what happens when God heals him of that incurable sickness, that he's saved from that. And then Isaiah hears wind of what's going on. And he comes and asks Hezekiah, what did you do? What did you show them? And Hezekiah tells him everything. So it's innocent in Hezekiah's mind. And Isaiah, he turns white with fear. And the Lord speaks through him and says, "Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that your fathers have laid up and stored to this day, they'll be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left. And some of your sons who will issue from you, whom you beget, they'll be taken away, and they will become officials in the palace of the king of Babylon." Moving forward from there, we find Manasseh, who is labeled as the most evil king of Judah, and he took the nation to its farthest reaches of idolatry and sin. Then we come to Manasseh's grandson, Josiah, who's remembered as a great king, as a good king, who did his best to turn the nation back to God after they went and found a copy of the law in the temple. And he did his best to renew that covenant relationship with God. But it's just too late. And in the end, near the end of 2 Kings, you read that the Lord says, "However, the Lord did not turn his fierceness of his great wrath from which his anger burned against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh provoked him." Josiah's promised, though, that he's going to be spared from that destruction himself. He's not going to see that destruction, but it is quickly coming. And then we arrive at one of his sons, Jehoiakim, who we're told did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we're going to pick back up in Daniel chapter 1. And we'll read the first couple verses here. "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and brought them to the land of Shinar, in the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God." Nobody should be surprised at this. Nobody in Judah should be surprised that this happened. Isaiah told them a long time ago this is going to happen. Jeremiah has spent his entire career at this point telling the people, this is coming. Turn back or prepare. But to no avail, captivity occurs. Captivity comes. And this important verse, beginning of verse 2, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim into Babylon's hand." Remember that phrase, "the Lord gave." It's going to show up quite a bit throughout the story and the life of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar remembers He's heard stories of the beauty and the awesomeness of Judah, all the things they have, and hears and remembers the story of the power of this God that's there. So a side note that's important for history's sake is that a common belief among nations that worshipped other gods was that when you conquered a nation that had a different god than you and your God, you've beaten that God, and you then get to take of his power and absorb into that. So that's what Nebuchadnezzar wants. He heard this awesome story of a God who saved a man from the brink of destruction. He wants that. He's an empire. He's trying to lead a massive, mighty empire. He wants that knowledge of protection in his back pocket. So just interesting side note for that. Nebuchadnezzar wants all the things of the treasury, the wealth of the temple, and he wants literally the wealth of the people as well. He goes in and he orders his chief of officers, Ashpenaz, to come in and to take of the children of the royal family and of the other nobles. But he doesn't want just anybody. No, he wants the most handsome. He wants the ones that are showing the most intelligence and most intellect. He wants them, and he wants them to bring them back to Babylon. He wants them to be trained in the ways of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians, in their literature, their language, of their science, of their theology, of astrology. He wants to make them wise men for his use. And he orders that these young men are going to be sharing his blessings. He's not just going to put them in the nation and kind of walk away from them. No, he's going to bring them into his palace. He's going to bring them into his life and share all the bounty that's there. They're not really transitioning out of into a squalor life. They're going to live a nice, comfortable life. And they're going to get the best education possible. He wants to come in and bring these individuals in and show them the mercy and the power that is behind Babylon, that they don't need this little insignificant nation of Judah anymore, that no, they're in part of us now, an awesomeness of Babylon. And then we're introduced into what's really the four major characters, as far as God's side of things, of this story. We get Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And of course, to help further along this transition from Judah into this Babylonian idea, he goes in and he changes their names. They all had, interesting enough, in Hebrew, their names all had something to do with God and tying back to God. Daniel meant, God is my judge. Hananiah meant, grace and mercy is a gift from God. Mishael, who has asked for God. And Azariah is, God has helped. Yahweh has helped. And he comes in, and he continues with that further thought. I don't know if he spoke Hebrew, but he might have had an understanding of this. He changes their names to bless the names of the Babylonian gods. Daniel becomes Belteshazzar, which means Bel protect the king. Bel means Lord and had a tie-in directly to their chief of gods, Marduk. Shadrach is, Hananiah becomes Shadrach, which means the command of Aku, who is the moon god. Mishael becomes Meshach, which means who is Aku. And Azariah becomes Abednego, which is an easy translation. It means servant of Nebo, the wisdom god for there. He's giving their lives now and their names in dedication to these other gods. The intent here is for them to forget who they are, what they're about, their old nation, their old lives, and let's move on to greater things. Put it all behind you, move on to greater things. What we see, though, is that doesn't work on these four young men. They've done something special in their life to not compromise who they are and to remember that they are servants of God. But talk about your world really being turned upside down. How would you feel if that happened to you or to happen to any of us? If a foreign body came in to take away everything that we've learned and have been taught, to be scrubbed from you, to be molding into something that you're really not, how easy would that be to accept what's put before you? I mean, you're now in a foreign place, far away from your family, far away from everything you've known. How easy would that be to say, what's done is done? How often do we do that very same thing? A lot of modern communicators and experts in that field would call this the fool's choice. The fool's choice is generally when an individual has come to a crossroads and only sees one of two paths to go forward, and neither of them tend to be very good. You could say an example of this is, for example, you could put you're part of you're the executives in a business, and the CEO wants to move the company around. And he's asked everyone to make a plan, to come up with an idea, to do some research, and to figure out what's going on. You come sit down together, and each of you present, hey, it'd be great to move us from here to, say, Dallas, or maybe to Houston, or maybe to Seattle, or Washington, D.C. And the CEO hears all this and says, okay. And he says, I've got a better idea. Let's move out to a little podunk town in the middle of Kansas, for instance, just somewhere in the middle of Kansas that insignificant for anything. There's not a lot of economy there, but hey, we could do a lot of good there. We could do this. And you're all scratching your head saying, what is up with that? That doesn't make sense. It's not going to help the business. And after thinking a little bit, you realize and recognize, oh, this is where he's from. This is where the CEO's family is all at. Okay, that makes some sense why he wants to be there, but that's not going to help the business at all. And as he goes and beginning to kind of issue maybe some back opinions, he shuts them all down real quick, saying, no, this is what's going to happen. I've already made the decision. This is what's going to happen. That's not how the process has worked and what's been commanded to work with this. So you're now left with two options. Most of us would think two options. Either we go along with what he's saying and the company's ruined, or somebody stands up and is fired for putting for standing up to the CEO here. And one man gets up and says, hold on, let's put a pause here real quick, and address the situation and brings to light in his eyes and mind the little bit of hypocrisy that's going on here, and says, let's stop and reflect on this. And the CEO thinks about it for a second and says, you're right. You're right. I've been coming at this the wrong way. Let's go again here. That individual passed over the fool's choice. He found that third path and that third option. And that's what Daniel and his compatriots did in all of this. Instead of seeing a path A and path B, they found that path C, saying instead of let's change who we are or stand for ourselves and die, they found a way to stand through and go by. Daniel's probably about 13 to 16 years old at this point. He's in the prime of his life, and he makes a really mature decision in what's going on here. And you see that in the beginning of verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself. He would not defile himself. Daniel knows of all things that have occurred so far, all the things that are going to change and happen, that he's got to keep his relationship with God. And then Daniel makes a bold move. He knows so far everything that's happened has not been a compromise to his relationship with God. It's just things that had to have occurred and go on. It's all right. But then we get to what Nebuchadnezzar has commanded. You are going to share of my table. You're going to share of my bounty, of my food and my wine and my lifestyle. Daniel knows that's not going to work. If you want to have this relationship with God, if he knows what the law says, that's not going to happen. That can't happen. So he goes to Ashpenaz and says, can we be excluded? This is going to compromise who we are. Can we, instead of eating all of this wonderful, rare steaks, all of this pork and bacon, and all of these other things that we've never tried before, but things that would compromise, change our relationship here, can we instead have fruits and vegetables and water? This is really bold. This goes directly against what the king has said, this man who now controls your life and all your actions. And it would put not just Daniel's life on the line, but Shadrach's, Meshach's, and Abednego's life, and Ashpenaz's life on the line. This is scary. This is a big moment for one who's probably about 14 years old to stand up and say, hold on a minute. Let's go back and look at this. But then in verse 9, you get that same statement again. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion. God is standing with them. God is standing behind them. And Daniel knows, if God is for me, what could stand against me? God stands and Ashpenaz relents and says, okay, let's figure out a way we can do this. And Daniel comes up with a compromise. He says, let's go 10 days. Give us 10 days to try this new diet and then judge and see. Are these other men of Judah who you've brought in, are they equal to what we are becoming on our special diet? Or the blessings of the king going to be what we need? God is with them. And after 10 days, Daniel and his compatriots, they look so much better than these men that have been feasting and fasting on life and just enjoying life, reveling in life with all these new things. But Daniel and his compatriots, they look fatter, they look healthier, they look fuller, probably are acting a little bit smarter too, because the rest of them is not compromised. They're not having to change who they are with this. So in the end of it, Ashpenaz says, okay, you've got it. You can have your fruits and vegetables and water. Nobody has to know. It'll be awesome. It's great. And then we move into the next part of the story, beginning in verse 17, which really summarizes all of the rest of chapters 2 through 6. It says, as for these 4 young youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. And Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Again, you see that. And God gave. He gave them everything that they would need to succeed in their new roles. He protected them and guided them and helped them lead his people and the rest of the nations through these next 7 years of captivity. And these young men, they stood out to Nebuchadnezzar because they relied on their God to choose him, to choose God over everything else. And we see that as these stories continue. You see that with Daniel in chapter Daniel, and he honors God in that moment. And then into chapter 4, again, it's another dream. Nebuchadnezzar has another dream and brings Daniel in and says, you did it once, do it again. And Daniel says, again, I can tell you, but it's not man doing this. This comes from God. And he tells him what his dream means. And the scary part here with this is that Daniel's answer, this interpretation, it is not favorable for Nebuchadnezzar at all. It's going to put him in a very uncomfortable place. And Daniel feels pretty nervous about giving him that answer. That this is an answer that's going to ruin the king. It's going to be bringing the king down into a humbling state for a long time to come. And who would want to hear that? Again, his life is put on the line, but God is with him. God stands with him. And Nebuchadnezzar says, just tell me it, and everything will be okay. And he does. And it all comes true with that. And then in chapter 6, all of us are so familiar with this story. Daniel is a much older man at this point. You're probably talking about age 90 almost. And he's gone through all these empires. Now, 2 different empires, multiple kings. He's stuck around because God has stayed with him because of that one decision he's made. And at this point in time, he's a righteous man. He's known as a righteous man, an honorable man, but he's also in a high level of power at this point. He's over quite a few of these regional governors. And there's his compatriots of Persia, these men who are of his same level. They don't like that. They don't like that this foreigner, this strange man with his strange beliefs and religion is of their nature and their power. So they scheme, and they figure out a way to get Daniel into trouble. And Daniel knows that he's not going to compromise this. So instead of worshiping King Darius, as has been now written in the law, he says, I can't do that. So he goes into his house and he prays to God. And of course, these men that hate him know he's going to do this. And so they wait it out and bust Daniel for the fact that he's now broken the law. And the results of this law, the consequences of this law is that Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den. He is put to death in this manner. No one's going to survive this den of lions, this den of hungry lions. Their problem, they're done. And Darius knows that he's been tricked. He's been fooled and feels awful. In fact, he's up all night long fretting about it. He gets no sleep. And as soon as the light of the next morning comes up, he runs to that location and has the rock removed and calls in, Daniel, are you there? Yeah. And you hear Daniel just pipe up from the end. Yeah, I'm here. Good morning. Been waiting for you. And Darius says, how has this happened? How have you survived all night long with this? These lions, how have you survived it? And he says, my God shut the mouth of these lions. My God has stood with me. And then, of course, his enemies get what's coming to him. And the name of God is honored throughout the entire nation, the entire empire. The Persian Empire was massive. Everyone knows of the power and honor of God. Daniel was able to do amazing things in his life because he chose so early on. And when things weren't so troubling and weren't so hard, he was not going to defile his relationship with God. So what can we do and learn to emulate Daniel, to maintain that same relationship with God? Let's go back to chapter 1. And you were following along through the stories. I could hear the pages turning. Let's go back to chapter 1 and let's look at two very important parts that we've already talked about and have mentioned throughout that chapter already. The first is Daniel says, I will not give in. I'm not going to defile myself. He will remain undefiled. Daniel chose not to leave God's side, even when it would cost him everything. Notice every single choice that's brought up had the penalty of costing him his life. When he decides not to eat of the king's blessing, it could have cost him his life. If he was not able to do as Nebuchadnezzar asked the first time in his dreams, it was going to cost Daniel his life. He was worried it was going to cost him his life for telling an unfavorable dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And getting thrown into the den of lions for standing up for what he believed in, that would have cost him his life. But this man, Daniel, he stood by his convictions, and he lived them out, like so many of our brethren from long ago that stood for what was right, even in the face of life-ending persecution. Brethren, we are so blessed that we don't have to worry about that nowadays, that we don't have to worry about us being riddled out as Christians and being put to the stake to burn, or being thrown into a lion's den, or having our faith challenged to the point of death. We don't have to worry about that. But we do have similar situations that arise in our everyday lives. For instance, when you're in the workplace, are you just going to go along with the flow of things? What if in your place of work you knew or found out that it's real easy to skim money off the top or to take something out of the register? No one would know. But it's easy to do that. Would you compromise yourself in doing that? Would you defile yourself and your name and your reputation with that? Young people, it's summertime. This is a time that it's fun, it's a level of freedom, you don't have school anymore, not many responsibilities. It's time to enjoy yourselves. But have you set into your heart this idea of I'm not going to defile myself? In that level of freedom and fun, there's a lot of room to find things that can really damage you or destroy you, either physically or spiritually. Have you decided and purposed in your heart that you're not going to be compromised by that? And we see that Daniel's choice not to defile himself, it's affected not just Daniel and not just his close friends, but it's affected the people, and it's affected all of these nations around. Daniel's light shone so very strongly in all of this. His reputation, his understanding of things was known throughout the whole nation and throughout that entire period of him being there. Can our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, can they identify us as a people like Daniel, a people blessed by God, that God gave with us? And that next point is, the Lord gave. The Lord gave Daniel so much success and everything because he made that initial choice. I'm not going to defile myself when it comes to my relationship with God. We can see God's hand throughout the entire story of the book of Daniel. You see his hand when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are tossed into the fiery furnace and come out unscathed. You see it again when God brings up and humbles the high, when he humbles Nebuchadnezzar and humbles Belshazzar, and then he raises up those who have humbled themselves. He makes it very clear to all the rulers and men in charge, you may think you are high and you are mighty, but no, I, God, am in charge of all of this. I, God, am ruler and king. And Daniel recognizes that fact. You see it throughout the whole story. You always see a man who is so eager to give credit where credit is due. In fact, both instances of the dream, he says, this is not me doing this. This is God. This is my God who is using me as a tool to get to this point. In chapter 5, with Belshazzar, you see, and God tells him through Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar was humbled because of me, and you're about to be humbled because of me, because you have defiled my name. And in the lion's den, Daniel turns it all back to God. When Darius says, how did you survive this? My God gave me success. My God protected me. And it's by his hand I survived. Also notice the stark difference in humility here between these individuals. Daniel's a very humble man. We've tracked to that. But look at these other men, these other rulers. You get Nebuchadnezzar. He's a man of arrogance and pride, looking out on his rooftop at everything, all the wonders and splendors of Babylon. The Hanging Gardens, which are called one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's beautiful. It's awesome. He's a wonderful empire. Look at what I have done. Look at this majesty. And you hear God come down and say, that is me. That is not you. And you're going to be humbled. And he does. Belshazzar takes the utensils of the temple, brings them in, and decides, we're going to have a party. We're going to revel and a large level of debauchery with this, and we're going to defile these beautiful vessels of this nation's God. And God comes in and says, nope. Humbled. And that very night, Belshazzar is put to death. Darius let his pride get the best of him, got a big head, and allowed for Daniel, an innocent man, probably a close confidant, to suffer. Daniel shows throughout all of this, God is in control, not man. Daniel chose when he was a young man, probably around the age of 14, that instead of going along with the flow of things, instead of accepting this change that's happening and giving into all that change, or this chance of freedom from which most people would consider a rule-heavy, a ritualistic, a freedom-restraining religion. Doesn't that sound familiar to how people are describing us nowadays? Instead of all of that, though, he chose to have this relationship with God. And he chose to put on his faith and his trust in a God who has promised that if you keep the law in your heart, you meditate on it daily, and you do all that's written in it, that God will stand with you. He will cause you to prosper. He will cause you to succeed in all things if you do not defile my relationship. His one choice when he was young, it impacted so many individuals. He was such a foundation for his friends. When their trial arose, they came out unscathed. His decision not to defile himself saved all of the wise men of the empire. Saved his life, saved his friend's life, saved all of these relatively innocent lives. And he is able to tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream and bring God honor. And it brought Daniel a level of power and prominence in the nation. His decision not to defile himself kept him out of the lion's mouth. And God closed it. And in that, the name of God was honored. to a level that has not been seen since the days of Solomon. One decision that one man made when he was young changed the fates of so many people. But Daniel's not the only one. What about Joseph? What about Moses? What about Joshua or Caleb? What of Esther? What about Paul? What about Jesus? All of these individuals chose in advance, at a time when trial was not in their face. They chose, I am not going to defile myself and defile my relationship with God. I'm going to retain it because I want to be blessed and I want protected. So where do we sit today? Have we made that decision yet? Thank you for your time and paying attention. We'll be now having a closing prayer.